Hello and welcome back to Storytime with Alex. I guess this is chapter 11b because we're about to hear Leia and Ada's story, and I thought we would just do that on its own little chapter so as not to make things too long. So Leia and her gran, who I'm assuming is called Ada, have been rescued. There's been a mysterious voice that helped them out and no one knows where it came from. I didn't mention that this is From Allbyon to Britannia, Book 3, The Last Wizard by Brandy Pearson, but sit down, relax, and let's hear Leia and Ada's story. Ada Martin had been born and brought up in a little village in Kent, not far from Gravesend. The women in her family had the reputation of being witches, helping with childbirth, supplying herbal remedies, and being consulted about affairs of the heart, including love potions and spells for better fortune. Since the coming of the National Health Service, such women were not as necessary to village life, but were honoured anyway and remained at the heart of the community. Ada had married Tommy Boswell, whose granddad had been a gypsy, and they had 4 children. As her children grew, they moved away and lost interest in their mum's spells and the like, and eventually ceased to believe there was anything special about their mother at all. Tommy had died in the 1990s, and she was left in her little terraced house. Her youngest child, Christine, moved up to London and got together with a young Danish seaman called Anders, who she met at a screening of the Star Wars trilogy. She fell pregnant when Anders was away on a voyage. When she told him on the phone, he broke off the relationship and never came back. It became clear that he had another relationship back home in Copenhagen and completely abandoned her. Ada moved up to London to be with her daughter, and they lived together in a council flat in Peckham. When her daughter was born, Christine named her Leia after the princess in Star Wars. Sadly, Christine was killed in a traffic accident when Leia was 3, and Ada took on the upbringing of her granddaughter. One day, when Leia was about 5, Ada discovered her on the balcony of their 3rd-floor flat, charming a flock of birds, and realised that she had inherited her own magical skills. She took to teaching her about witchcraft. The local fairies decided that a balcony was not inside the house, and fairies began to visit them there. Although they had met many people who thought they were witches or wanted to be witches, neither Ada nor Leia had ever met another genuine witch in Peckham, and yet they never ceased to look for other true witches. As Leia grew, Ada started to become forgetful. She went to her doctor, who thought that she might be developing Alzheimer's disease. Ada was very concerned that she might misuse her magical powers as her condition deteriorated. One day, she took Leia out on a trip back to her home village and performed a spell to transfer all her powers to her granddaughter. After that, she ceased to work any magic and sank down into greater confusion. Leia did not want to be separated from her grandmother and became her carer. She started to skip school. They were both living off Ada's old age pension and often went without. Leia took to shoplifting, sometimes for food and sometimes just for fun. She started to get known to the local police, only managing to keep out of trouble because she was caring for Ada. She continued to search for other witches, visiting several shops, pagan groups and so-called covens. She came across Vlad and Hecate Black. She was wary of them and never let them know that she had magic powers, but they found where she lived and took to visiting Ada when Leia was out. In her confusion, Ada told them stories of her past as a witch, and they began to try to coerce her into performing magic for them. They pretended that they wanted to help her and took her pension book. They found out about Leia's shoplifting and pushed her into stealing for them. She stole from Hyperborea for them. Eventually, they blackmailed Ada and Leia into moving into Temple House with them. Realising that Leia would do anything to keep her grand safe, they made her help them steal Sebastian's book of spells. One of the skills Ada had taught Leia was the use of dream messages. She had sent out a dream message asking for help, hoping that another witch would experience the dream and find out where she was and come to help her. Because of her name, Ruth had dreamed the dream in the world of Star Wars. What confused them all was that Leia insisted that Ada came from a family of witches. Sebastian and Rose had failed to find any magic in Britain, despite searching for it for well over 300 years. Ada might be confused, but Leia certainly was a witch, no relative of either Rose or Sebastian. She told them of the spells her gran had used as she was growing up. When Leia and Ada had gone back to the village of her birth, they searched for other witches, but there was no one left from their own family and no traces of other witches or wizards. They had felt all alone. They were all alone, which was why they had fallen in with the blacks. Rose could not understand how she had never found a British witch, nor come across any fairies. She'd even visited the villages of Kent in the days when she travelled about, and had never found another witch. We did not hear anything from Brenda Brown or the blacks for the rest of that week. Rose thought they must be licking their wounds. Dad had been trying to discover who Brenda Brown's spy in the triangle might be. We were now aware that we were being watched, which was weird and a little unpleasant. Much to everyone's surprise, Rose invited Leia's gran, whose name was Ada, to stay in her cottage with her, which meant Leia had to stay there too. Our holidays were coming to an end, and Ruth's mum returned from Los Angeles and took her home. Sebastian wasn't answering his phone. Father Joe phoned Marco and told him that SJ was okay, but wanted to be left alone for a while. One Sunday morning, Dad took the train to Heathrow to pick Miss P up from the airport and bring her back in a taxi. Miss P was introduced to Ada and Leia and wanted to know everything that had happened. That took a long time. Ruth spoke the spell that made the fairies visible to her, and Miss P was entranced. The fairies seemed to be very pleased as well. Some of them did a little dance to say thank you for the milk. No one told them it had been intended for hedgehogs. When Ruth's mum took her home, she assumed that nothing much had happened while she had been away, and we didn't tell her anything, except that Rose's friend Sebastian was okay now. We all waited to see what Ruth was going to tell her. The longer she left it, the more there was to tell. I had talked to Ruth several times about it. She had decided that she certainly needed to tell her about the magic she was learning from Rose. However, Rose had become a sort of unofficial auntie. She didn't look old enough to be an unofficial grandma, and she didn't want to spoil the friendship that was growing between the three of them. She hoped it would go well, but was very worried that it wouldn't. She didn't know when to start. There you go. That is the end of chapter 11. Little chunk at the end. Join me next time to see how Ruth will tell her mum and what the nasty mob are going to do now. See you later.